Vivek Ramaswamy, a 2024 Republican presidential candidate, is going against the GOP with his current stance on cannabis and psychedelics. But he made his millions in the pharmaceutical industry. So is that really going to translate to a favorable cannabis and drug policy once he becomes president, if he becomes president? Well, let's hear it from him and hope he's telling the truth. Now, we've been taking a look at all the presidential candidates and their stances on drugs, both Republicans and Democrats. We've taken a look at Ron DeSantis, it's a big no-go for me, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has some interesting ideas on what he would do if he was elected president, and today we're going to take a look at Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, Vivek became a millionaire in the pharmaceutical world, so we're going to get into that in a little bit. But let's take a look at his own words and what he said he would do if he was elected president in regards to cannabis and drugs.
I know you're in the pharmaceutical world, so how do you feel about marijuana? How do you feel about decriminalizing marijuana? What is your stance on that?
So I was in the pharmaceutical world. I'm not anymore, but that was where I built my first company. I think it should be decriminalized. I think it is a farce that we have a local regime where it's decriminalized, where the federal government says wink and nod, look the other way. We got to catch up with the times. It's not a popular position in the Republican Party, but again, like I said, I got to speak the truth. Whether you vote for me or not, it's your choice. I think the time has come to decriminalize it.
That was just a quick little comment he made at the end of a discussion with the Cartier Family podcast. Now, if you want to watch the entire podcast, I'll pin the link in the description for you. You can check it out. It's pretty interesting. But notice he didn't really go into any details, and the question came at the very, very end of the discussion, which is fine. But all the good stuff usually comes at the end. And it's unfortunate that he didn't really get into too many details. But that's okay for right now. That's okay. Now let's listen to some comments he made about some other drugs.
I share your skepticism of the war on drugs. You don't hear me talk about the war on drugs. I'm not a war on drugs person. I think that under-discussed in both parties, but I'll speak for the party that I'm running in, is the demand side of this problem. It is easy to point your finger at somebody else. It is a lot harder, just like the Xi Jinping example I gave earlier. It's a lot harder to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what is the mental health epidemic, the loss of purpose, the void of meaning in this country that results in people turning to fill in the blank? It was opioids 10, 15 years ago. It's fentanyl today. We have to address that. I think I'm probably the only person in the modern history of our party that is open to a conversation about, for veterans at least, let's start with PTSD, where there's good evidence of psychedelics from ayahuasca to ketamine. You could actually have an open discussion about rationally giving people off-ramps. I personally know parents whose kids have died who believe, and I think on good authority, that their kids could have at least survived by having an alternative path that didn't end in the way the fentanyl path ends for 200 Americans per day across this country.
Now, those comments were made at a recent Porcupine Freedom Festival in New Hampshire. You gotta love the way America names things, right? If it doesn't have an animal or freedom in the title, is it even a festival? Shout out PorcFest. Now, I like the fact that Vivek is rattling off stats about the fentanyl crisis and how many people are dying per day, especially veterans. However, he doesn't really say he has a plan on what to do to implement those policies. His policies are taking a step further than the GOP traditional policy is, but he doesn't really lay out a plan or express the chances of him actually doing that if and when he becomes president. You have to consider the makeup of Congress when he becomes president. Is it going to be a Democratic House and a Republican Senate? Or is he going to have a Republican Senate and House and able to do what he wants? And if he does have that, how high up in his agenda is drug policy reform going to be? We don't know. But what we do know is that he became a millionaire based in the pharmaceutical world, more importantly, the biopharmaceutical world, starting and selling multiple pharmaceutical companies for a lot of money and making his way around the pharma world. Now, he says that he isn't a big war on drugs guy. You won't hear him speak about the war on drugs. That might be because he's made his money in the big pharma world. And Big Pharma doesn't really want to talk openly about the war on drugs. They just want to quietly settle lawsuits and then move on. Now, that's not Vivek's fault. That's the pharmaceutical captured industry at a glance. But is he really going to push for it? We don't know. In April of 2023, Forbes estimated his net worth to be $630 million. All came from the biotech and financial industries. And that's actually a major conflict of interest if you're going to be doing a war on drugs policy change. Unless you're going to change that policy to favor the biopharmaceutical world first and then trickle it down to the rest of the people. Could be a pathway that he could take. I don't really want to speculate. But it is going to be tough to advance a pro-cannabis agenda that eats into the profits of Big Pharma, especially when Big Pharma donates over $26 million per election cycle to Congress. Now, on top of that, you have all the personal connections that Vivek has made over his career in the pharmaceutical world, some professional, some personal, or both, that he's going to have to put aside or in the back to favor the people in a pro-cannabis or descheduling policy. I also wanted to go back and note something he said at the very beginning. He said he's no longer in the pharmaceutical industry. Well, as of 2023, New York Times reported that he still owns over 7% of a share of Roivant, the company. Now, the company's not profitable, but I don't really know if that matters because the statement he said is he's no longer in the industry when that is factually incorrect. So take that with a grain of salt. I want to point out something he said during his comments in those interviews. He said something like, America fell behind in the cannabis policy. We need to catch up in the way we treat cannabis in this country. Well, who's he referring to? Well, who is exactly who he's referring to, if that makes sense. There's a lot of who's in that sentence, like an owl. Ooh. He's referring to the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs. In December of 2020, they reclassified cannabis and cannabis resin under an international listing that recognizes its medical and medicinal values. Now, not a lot of people heard about that article because there was a lot going on during 2020. But they didn't recommend rescheduling it. They actually redid it and reclassified it into a medicinal category. That is who he's referring to that we need to play catch up with. And since the World Health Organization determines a lot of things for the world based on medical classifications, that's important to note. Now, a lot of steps need to happen before Vivek can actually change the drug policy of America. He has to win the Republican nominee, then he has to win the general presidential election, then he needs to have a favorable Congress, then he needs to implement an action plan, which as of now, he hasn't stated one. But it's promising. There's a crack in the door. There's a little bit of daylight coming through. Maybe it's something to work with. I hope this video helped. If not, maybe the next one will help you a little bit more than this one. Till next time, stay blessed.